I'm looking through you.
Hi, I got a request, and the request was, could you do a tutorial on table, hands and knees? And that is great. It's one of those simple poses that doesn't look like a lot, but by working on alignment and actions in that pose, sets you up beautifully for downward dog, or incline, or chaturanga dandasana, or numerous poses that come out of the work of table. The first thing I want to look at is how you place the arms. Often people either think their shoulders aren't that wide and they set up really narrow, or they turn their hands out or in thinking that'll get them in the right place. We want to have the fingers, second finger especially, pointed straight forward, best of your ability, straight forward. And then you want them truly shoulder width so that your arms make two parallel lines. Not too angled in, not too angled out. If you have really tight shoulders, you can work wider, but working narrower is never going to help you in this pose. So shoulder width or wider, fingers pointed forward. We tend to roll these elbows facing the crease forward and locking them. All that does is trap you. Once you get into that locked elbow, you stop using the muscles and you're just supporting yourself on the joint. We're trying to get out of the joint. This is a lot like the instructions I've talked about with not locking the knees when you're in standing poses, if you've looked at some of the other videos that I've done. Same thing. Don't want to lock, you want to get out of the joint, work above and below it. So without moving those fingers, keeping them pointed forward, we want to see if we can get the elbows to point out to the side, so the creases face each other. Now some people who are really mobile will continue to lock the elbow here, and these arms will actually be hyperextending in toward each other, looking like sort of an X, or like it's going to become an X. Somebody who's that mobile and really locks in, I'm going to actually ask them to bend their elbows so that they get out of the joint and start using muscles. I'm on the other end of that spectrum. I can't hyperextend to save my life, and so I'm always working to try and straighten. So we have our fingers pointing forward, we have our hands shoulder width, we have our elbows pointing out to the side and either bending if you tend towards still locking here, or working towards straight if you tend toward really bent. The other thing that happens is what's happening in the upper arms and the shoulders, which affects the chest and the upper back. When you start to get onto your hands and knees, a lot of people, shoulders tend to creep forward and we collapse into that joint. You want to think of taking this humerus bone, the top bone in your arm, pressing it back towards your tricep and pressing your tricep back towards your thigh. As you do that, not only will the shoulders come away from your ears, giving you length and space between the ears and the shoulders, it will open up the chest and allow the upper back between the shoulder blades to start to soften. Kneeling mountain just so that you can see what the legs do when they're in table. Right now, Mel's thighs are parallel to each other. They're perpendicular, knees right below the center of the hip socket. Often when people come to table, they'll take the knees too wide. Thank you, Mel. And they end up with the legs angled out, which doesn't support the pelvis very well. Or sometimes they'll bring the knees really close together. Again, we've created an angle. Now we're angled in, so we've given ourselves too narrow of a base. You really want to work with the knees just enough apart that the thighs are truly parallel lines, vertical lines. They'll line up with the way the shins are parallel behind there. As Mel sets up in a table, there are a few things I definitely want to look for. I want to make sure that her hips line up right above her knees, and where she's set up right now, she's at a bit of an angle. I don't want to get deceived by the seam. I really want to look at the center of the hip, center of the knee, and make sure if a plumb line dropped, that would be right down. They would both line up. So I bring her back, and there her hands are a little too far forward, so I'm going to bring them back too. Notice I don't have her hands straight below her shoulders. There's almost a hand's length, about 5 inches, from where that drop would be to where she puts her hands. That's really important in this work. So hands are forward of the shoulders, hips are right above the knees, legs extend back, and the feet are parallel with a block between them. So I showed you on Mel how to set up the legs and this angling of the arms forward. We didn't really talk about why, and I'll get to why now. In the tradition I teach in, Eischens Yoga comes out of Iyengar, and in that tradition you should be able to go from incline, where the hands are right below the shoulders, to table, to downward dog, without adjusting anything. And so if the hands are right below your shoulders when you're in incline, that's a pretty good gauge of how far forward they should be in table. We didn't really talk about the spine yet, and the spine is real important here. Most of us at some point or another got taught to try and create a flat back, and so we start tucking the tailbone under, trying to flatten out the lumbar curve. What actually happens is people get really high up there. The other issue is people who are real tight in the upper back, and that upper back is lifting, overlifting, because it's so tight it draws that thoracic spine up toward the ceiling. Some of that will be helped by drawing those triceps back. But at first you may just have to learn to let go here. We want to get the pelvis so that the pelvis is really parallel to the floor. Legs are here, pelvis parallel to the floor. You're truly making a right angle. And often the pelvis looks like this. For somebody who's really mobile and you ask them to relax it, they drop and it goes like that. And so then you have a really deep curve in the back of the waist. You want all these curves that are present in the spine, the cervical curve, the thoracic curve, the lumbar curve, they should all be present in table. Should look like you do when you're standing. Now you just change your relationship to gravity. So, for that person who's a little bit tucked under, you're going to ask them to relax that pelvis until it's truly parallel to the ground. It will feel collapsed to that person. And for that person who's really collapsed, you might have them bring that up a little bit, but make sure you don't lift them so high that they flatten or tuck under. You want to have a little bit of curve in the lower back. So here's your pose. You're in table. Now what? Well, I have my triceps drawing back, and then I want to get weight into the knuckles of my hands by almost lifting the forearms. My elbows are pointing out to the side, so now my arms are really working. I'm trying to get weight in the knuckles. I'm trying to draw the upper arms back. I'm hugging the block with my feet, and I'm pressing back through my thighs. Thighs extending this way while my head reaches that way. Always trying to find where the extension is in the spine. In this pose, it's from head to thighs, head to tailbone. And then I want to draw my belly towards this curve. I don't want to draw my belly so far that I again remove the curve. I just want to engage the belly and draw it to support that curve. All the time trying to soften between the shoulders, trying to draw the upper arms back. These muscles are overworked. We don't need to use them anymore. These need to start taking up their work. Now this request came from a woman working with other pregnant women. She's a doula and she wanted to use this with some of her pregnant women. Often pregnant women have so much collapse in the joints because of the softening of the ligaments that their wrists hurt here. Anyone with carpal tunnel syndrome, their wrists hurt here as well. And while they're trying to build the strength to be able to lift up and get weight into those knuckles, it might still just hurt too much. So one of the things you can do is take a blanket or a towel and put it under the heels of the hands, so the heels of the hands come higher than the knuckles, which will lessen the severity of that crease here. If even that doesn't work, table can be done on your forearms. You still want to have the natural curves of the spine, but now your spine is at another angle. It's not parallel to the ground. So making sure you're not overlifting the head or dropping the head, making sure you're not tight in the upper back. You still are drawing the triceps towards your thighs, still pressing thighs and head away from each other. From here, there's lots of variations just working in table. Without disturbing your spine, you can take one leg back, trying to keep everything else still. So we're not going for height and collapsing here. We're not turning the leg out and lifting the hip. We're just going for parallel, head and heel reaching away from each other, and then you can come down and take the other side, head and heel reaching away from each other. You can challenge that further by reaching the opposite arm forward. Here it gets tricky. Want to see what's tricky about it? People reach forward from their shoulder. Shoulder still has to stay back away from the ears. Head and heel are where the length are, from the head to the heel, not from the fingers. From the head and the heel. Those are what are extending away from each other. One of the reasons we work in table first is it can be a place to find some of this work. If you try and find it when you're in a more dramatic pose like incline, if you're really tight in the upper back, it might be hard to let go. If you're really weak in the lower back, it might be hard to find that lift. So we find it in a simpler place. Now, one of the ways to find that lift of the belly that I talked about earlier is to add weight. This is a 10-pound sandbag, and I just put it right in that lumbar curve. And again, I'm not trying to flatten the curve. I'm trying to draw my belly to the weight. It's easier to do with the weight on my back. And then I'm going to continue to try and soften between the shoulder blades, draw my triceps toward my thighs. And now I'm working a whole lot. Those feet are still hugging the block. I'm extending back through the thighs and forward through the crown of my head. This pose, why is it so great in pregnancy? Well, when that belly's hanging out in front of you, walking around, it's working against gravity and it's really pulling on the spine. When you come to table and the belly's hanging here, it's hanging from 4-point suspension. It's working, your muscles don't have to work against gravity to hold your belly out in front of you. Your belly's just hanging. And then you can still create that same work. And in fact, a little weight on the back of the waist really helps ease some of the lower back pain women feel when they're pregnant. So we use table again as a basic place to start to find the work. You're getting out of the joints and building arm strength. By opening the chest and using the arms, you can start to lessen the tension in the upper back. By starting to engage the belly, you start to support the lumbar curve. And by engaging the legs here, you can extend the spine, working back through the thighs, forward through the head. This pose will eventually use your whole body. It'll set you up for all the other poses you need to do that are on the hands and the feet or the hands and the knees. And it will also start to give you the preparatory work for some of the more advanced work like inversions, headstands, handstands, or arm balances. It's a great place to start to find all this basic work. Make sure your hips are right above your knees. Block between your feet so the feet are parallel. Thighs are parallel to each other as well. Make sure those knees aren't too wide or too narrow. Hands are forward of the shoulders, maybe 5 or 6 inches forward. Fingers pointing forward. See if you can draw those upper arms back and keep the elbows pointing out to the side. And after you've found that, can you still create lift in the forearms, getting weight in the knuckles of the hands? All the natural curves are present in the spine. Head is in line with the spine, not dropped, not chin forward, looking down at the ground. Chest is wide open as you draw those triceps back. Belly draws toward the lumbar curve. And the head and the thighs extend away from each other. For those of you who are discovering that you like this work and you'd like to go deeper into Eischens Yoga, find a teacher near you. Go to eischensyoga.com and see if there are any Eischens Yoga teachers in your area. If you find yourself in the Twin Cities, come take my classes and workshops or contact me for a private individual session. If you really like this stuff, you can become an Eischens Yoga geek. Soon, we're going to have a t-shirt for that. And don't do a flat back, ever. Forget flat back, forget tucked under. You never heard it from me, and pretend you never heard it.